I'm Lauren Mitchell, 35 years old, and I still remember the sound of the champagne bottle breaking. It wasn't the party music or the clinking glasses that stuck with me. It was that sharp crack followed by the warmth of blood dripping down my cheek. One moment, I was standing in my parents' kitchen, politely declining their request. The next, I was on the floor, struggling to stay conscious, surrounded by people who had never seen behind the curtain of my family. That night, something shifted, something permanent, and the truth about who actually owned their house started to come to light. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand your ground with people who claim to love you. I was born and raised in a picture-perfect neighborhood just outside of Providence, Rhode Island. Our colonial home had shutters that matched the mailbox flower beds lined with bricks, and a lawn my mother measured with a ruler. From the outside, we looked like a family straight off a Hallmark card. My father, Stephen Mitchell, was a senior loan officer at a major bank downtown. My mother, Diane, didn't work outside the home, but she ran the household with military-level control. Growing up, every hour of my day was scheduled, and every decision filtered through their idea of success. My grades weren't allowed to dip below an A. My weight, posture, and clothing were constant topics of conversation. "Tuck in your shirt, Lauren." "No one respects a woman who looks sloppy," my mother would say, tugging at my collar until it choked me. At 14, I started babysitting to save money for college. My parents took every dollar. "This goes into your college account," my father said each time he pocketed the cash. By 16, I was scooping ice cream after school and working Saturdays at a hardware store. Same routine straight to them. Privacy didn't exist in our house. My mother read my journal, scanned through my text messages, and once made me stop seeing a friend because her family lived in an apartment complex. "She's not your kind of people," she said, as if kindness had a zip code. My younger brother Brian didn't live under the same rules. When he brought home a C, my parents clapped and said, "At least he tried." He quit baseball mid-season, and they took him out for ice cream. I stayed on honor roll for 4 years straight and was told I needed to start presenting myself better. By senior year, I had 2 college options: the Ivy League school my parents picked, or the state university that offered me a partial scholarship. I chose the state school. My parents chose silence. "We didn't raise you to be average," my father said. Before revealing the truth, they'd spent my college savings on kitchen renovations and 2 cruises. So I left. 18 years old, $300 in my bank account, and a dorm room that smelled like burnt popcorn and broken dreams. I found work fast. Morning shifts at the campus cafe, evening waitressing at a diner off the highway, weekend hours shelving books at the library. I slept maybe 4 hours a night. During my junior year, I met Claire Hudson. She was a guest speaker in one of my business classes, sharp, confident, a local real estate broker who didn't apologize for her success. After the lecture, I stayed behind to ask a few questions. She offered me an internship the next week. From there, I climbed. After graduation, I got a job at a small real estate office in downtown Boston. I lived in a tiny studio, walked to work, and took every client that no one else wanted. Showings at dawn, contracts at midnight. I studied every square foot of the city until I knew it better than I knew myself. Over time, the hard work paid off. I moved to a better agency. My commissions grew. I finally bought my first home, a 2-bedroom condo with river views in the back bay, the kind of place people stared at through car windows. It was mine, every inch of it earned, not given. For years, I kept my distance from my parents. A phone call on holidays, maybe a text on birthdays. Brian and I stayed closer. He became a doctor just like they always wanted, but he never stopped checking in on me. Then one Tuesday, an invitation arrived. Thick cardstock, gold-embossed letters. "Please join us in celebrating Dr. Brian Mitchell's 30th birthday. The party would be at my parents' house." Brian texted before I could toss it aside. Please come. It won't feel right without you. I'll run interference if it gets weird." I hesitated. The last time I saw our parents was at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, and I'd left early with a migraine and a splitting headache from being lectured about wasted potential. Still, it was Brian. He'd always been the one to slide me an extra cookie or sneak in a hug when things got too tense. So I went. I picked out a quiet cocktail dress, wrapped the gift an engraved watch he once admired, and drove the 40 minutes to my childhood home, hands sweating the whole way there. The front door swung open before I knocked. Brian smiled, arms wide. "Lauren, you made it." I smiled back, holding out the gift. "Happy birthday, Bri." He pulled me into a hug, and I stepped into a house that looked familiar, but not the same. New furniture, renovated kitchen, art that didn't look like my mother had picked it on clearance. Somewhere between the catered hors d'oeuvres and the clinking glasses, I felt it. Something was off. The way my parents greeted me, distant fake. The way they kept circling me in the room, I should have known. Because by the end of that night, I'd learned they didn't just want to talk. They wanted my home, and they had no intention of asking nicely. By the time I reached the back deck, my parents had already poured their third round of drinks. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, but inside the house, everything sparkled. New marble counters, fresh wallpaper, and a chandelier I was sure hadn't been there during my last visit. I stood near the edge of the crowd, watching my mother laugh just a little too loudly, and my father wave his drink around as he bragged to some guests about Brian's new hospital position. When I stepped closer to look at the old family photos on the mantel, I felt someone come up beside me. "You've gained weight," my mother said, her voice low but firm, like she was offering a helpful observation. "Real estate must not keep you very active." I turned, took a breath. "I've been training for a half marathon." She blinked, then sipped her wine and drifted away. I didn't expect warmth from her, but that kind of jab still landed harder than I like to admit. Later, my father caught me near the bar. He reached for a second glass of scotch while keeping his eyes on mine. "So is this real estate thing still working out?" "Not too late to go back and get a real degree. It's going very well, actually," I said, keeping my voice even. "Closed on a waterfront property last month, 7-figure commission." He gave a quick nod like he didn't believe me or maybe just didn't want to. But someone standing nearby had overheard. A friend of his, maybe, who suddenly perked up and started asking me about the market. Soon I had a small group gathered around asking about interest rates and neighborhood trends. I answered their questions, polite and professional, even as I noticed my parents exchanging glances from across the room. I found Brian not long after, and he pulled me aside. "Thanks for coming," he said, half laughing as he looked around at the crowd. "It means a lot, even if Mom and Dad invited the whole state of Rhode Island." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "But yeah, it's a lot." He gave a small smile. They wanted something flashy. You know how they get about appearances. We rejoined the crowd, but I kept noticing little things. The catering was from one of the priciest restaurants in Boston. The liquor, all top-shelf labels. Everything in the house had been updated cabinets, floors, fixtures. None of it felt casual. Then Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, touched my arm near the buffet. "You doing okay?" she asked, giving me a long look. I nodded. "Same as always." She hesitated. "Your parents, they've been acting a little off lately. Your dad keeps mentioning investment trouble. Diane's been jumpy." "Jumpy how?" "Hard to say," she murmured. "Asking odd questions. They brought up your job the other day. Wanted to know how much you're earning. It just struck me as strange." Before I could ask anything else, my mother waved her over to the kitchen. A while later, just after I refilled my glass with sparkling water, my mother found me again. Her smile was smooth, almost too smooth. "Lauren, your father and I would love to catch up. Just us. Come into the kitchen for a minute." She had her hand on my arm, not tight, but not loose either. Enough to make it clear I didn't have much choice. My father was already in there, leaning against the island, swirling something brown in a crystal tumbler. "Quite a turnout for your brother, don't you think?" he said. "He deserves it," I replied. They nodded, smiling in sync. My mother topped off her wine and leaned a little closer. So she began casually, "How's the real estate market these days?" "It's holding strong, still competitive. Any neighborhood's doing especially well. Downtown's still hot. Seaport, too." They exchanged a quick glance. "You must see some lovely properties," my father said, his voice still calm. "I do." There was a pause. Then I said it. "I actually bought one myself not long ago. Back Bay." The shift in their body language was immediate. "You bought a place?" my mother asked, setting down her wine. "In Back Bay 2-bedroom. View of the Charles, closed 3 months ago." How much, my father asked. I hesitated, but I was tired of dodging them. 630,000. They looked at each other again. This time the silence stretched. "Well, my father said we must have done something right. We gave you the foundation for all this success." "What foundation?" I asked. "The values we instilled. The discipline. Your education." I met their eyes. "I paid for college myself. You made that pretty clear." "Water under the bridge," my father said, waving it off. "What matters now is family." My mother stepped closer. "Your father and I are facing some short-term investment challenges. Retirement planning hasn't gone quite as expected." "I'm sorry to hear that. We're working with some advisors," my father added, "but we think it makes sense to keep this within the family." I said nothing, just waited. "What we're saying," my mother continued, "is that we think it would be best if you signed the condo over to us. Temporarily. The room didn't tilt, but it might as well have. You want me to give you my condo. Think of it as protecting an asset for the family," my father said. "We could rent it out, generate income. And where would I live? You could stay here for a while, or move in with your boyfriend. Isn't that getting serious?" I stared at them both. "You want me to hand over the property I saved for over a decade and move back into the house you kicked me out of?" "You're overreacting," my mother said. "This is about being grateful. You wouldn't be where you are without us." I shook my head. "You didn't pay for school. You didn't support my career. You didn't even show up at my graduation. We raised you," my father snapped. "Fed you, housed you. That means something." My mother stepped in again. "This will affect how we structure the will, Lauren. Brian's always been more supportive, so you're threatening to cut me out." "We're just stating the facts." "No," I said. "I'm not giving you my home." Her jaw tightened. "I always knew you were selfish. You're ungrateful," my father added, "after everything we've done." The kitchen door opened. Brian stepped in. "Everything okay in here?" "Just catching up," my mother said quickly, switching tones. "Talking about Lauren's real estate success." My hands were trembling as I excused myself to the restroom. Inside, I leaned over the sink, breathing slow and deep. My reflection looked pale eyes, wide cheeks flushed. I didn't want to cry. I just needed air. When I came out, Aunt Margaret was waiting in the hallway. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I'm fine." She held my arm gently. "Whatever they said to you, remember you're not that little girl anymore." I gave a small nod. Back in the living room, I did my best to keep a polite distance. Brian was opening gifts. My parents kept circulating like nothing had happened. But I caught pieces of conversation, my mother loudly lamenting how some children just don't understand family obligation, my father lecturing someone near the bar about how today's generation expects everything and gives nothing back. When it was time for the family photo, my mother insisted I stand between her and Brian. Her fingers dug into my shoulder as the camera clicked. "Perfect," she said, her teeth clenched in a smile. The Mitchells always united. As Brian opened a final gift, they found me again. "Think about what we said," my mother whispered. "We'll need an answer tonight. I already gave it. After all we've done," my father began, his voice louder now, "I don't owe you my home." "She's always been difficult," my mother hissed. "Always made things harder than they needed to be. I'm not being difficult. I'm being clear." Guests had started noticing. Conversations dimmed. Brian stood up. "Is something wrong?" "She's being unreasonable," my mother said. "We'll talk tomorrow," Brian said quickly. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "My answer's no." My mother's hand trembled as she grabbed another glass of wine. "You see? Selfish. Always has been." Aunt Margaret came over. "Diane maybe now isn't—" "Stay out of it," my father snapped. "This is family business." I started to step back. "I think I should go." My father moved in front of me. "We're not done here." "Yes, we are." And that's when it happened. Before I even saw her move, my mother grabbed a champagne bottle from the ice bucket. Brian shouted, "Mom, don't," but it was too late. She swung. The bottle hit the side of my head hard and fast, and everything blurred. The pain was sharp and hot. I stumbled back as voices swirled and the floor felt unsteady beneath me. Brian caught me before I hit the ground. His hands were already pressing a cloth napkin to my head. "She needs an ambulance," I heard Aunt Margaret shout. "Don't call anyone," my father barked. "We'll handle this privately." "She's bleeding," Brian snapped. "She needs a hospital." Stephanie appeared with a first aid kit. The last thing I saw before my vision dimmed was my mother pouring another drink, muttering, "She always had a flair for the dramatic." And somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. They were getting closer. The sirens got louder as Stephanie helped me into the back seat of Brian's car. My dress was soaked with blood, and the side of my face throbbed with every heartbeat. I leaned my head gently against the window, trying not to move too much. "Someone must have called 911 anyway," Stephanie said as she buckled in beside me. "Good," Brian replied. "This isn't something that should be brushed off." Out the back window, I saw the flashing red and blue lights approach from the opposite direction. My parents' house grew smaller behind us. The party was still going, but the night had split wide open. The ER was cold and quiet, a strange contrast to the noise we'd just left. A young doctor, maybe just out of med school, cleaned the cut and checked my vitals while Brian stood nearby. Stephanie filled out paperwork at the front desk, occasionally glancing in with worry. 12 stitches, the doctor said. "No skull fracture, but you do have a mild concussion." He gave me something for the pain and instructions to rest, no screen time, and plenty of fluids. Brian helped me out to the car and drove me back to his place. Stephanie had already pulled the guest room together, clean sheets, water on the nightstand pillows stacked to keep my head elevated. They took turns checking on me that night. Brian brought in tea, and Stephanie helped me sit up long enough to sip it. "I never thought she'd actually hurt you," he said quietly, sitting at the edge of the bed. "I didn't either," I said, voice slow. It was always words. Rules. Ultimatums. Never anything physical. Stephanie pulled a blanket over my legs. She didn't hesitate. Neither of us responded. The next morning, the pain had settled into a deep ache across the side of my head. My eye had started to darken, and I moved carefully to avoid the dizziness. I checked my phone. 6 missed calls from my mother, 4 from my father. Voicemails and texts, too. One message stood out. My mother's voice, sharp and angry. "You ruined your brother's party. You owe us an apology for making a scene. Call me back." Another from my father. "We need to finish our conversation about the condo. Your mother's upset, but if you're reasonable, we can move forward." I didn't respond. I blocked both numbers. Jason called as soon as he found out. "I'm coming over," he said. "Right now. I'm still at Brian's," I told him. "Stephanie's driving me home later today." "I should have been there," he said. "If I had been there, maybe—" "You couldn't have known," I said. "Let's just get through the week." By late afternoon, I was back in my condo. Jason brought over groceries and made dinner something simple and warm. He stayed the night and the next one too, helping me follow the doctor's orders. No screens, no work, no driving. Every morning he made sure I had coffee and my meds before heading to work. I rested as best I could. The headaches came and went. I avoided mirrors, kept the lights low. On Thursday, Brian stopped by with a small stack of mail. "These came to the house for you," he said, placing the pile on the coffee table. "I grabbed them when I went back to pack some stuff. You're moving out." "We're looking for a place," he said, shrugging. "Stephanie doesn't want to stay there, and I don't either." He stayed for a few minutes, then left for a shift at the hospital. After he left, I sorted through the envelopes, credit card offers, catalogs, a utility bill addressed to my name at my condo. But one envelope stood out. It was from a bank I didn't recognize. The addressee was listed as Trustee Mitchell Family Trust. That wasn't a title I'd ever seen before. I opened the envelope carefully. The letter was brief, something about delinquent mortgage payments and a request for the trustee to contact the bank. I sat back rereading it. I didn't know anything about a family trust, and I certainly didn't know I had any authority over my parents' property. Curious, I opened my laptop and pulled up the county's online property records. I typed in their address and waited. When the page loaded, I stared at the screen. The house wasn't listed under Stephen and Diane Mitchell. It was owned by the Mitchell Family Trust. The trust had been established nearly 20 years ago by my grandparents. Then I saw something else. An amendment dated 4 years ago. It named a new trustee effective upon their granddaughter's 30th birthday. My name. I closed the laptop and reached for my phone. Jason picked up after 2 rings. "Hey, everything okay? Can someone be made trustee of something and not know about it?" He was quiet for a second. "It's not common, but if someone set up a trust and put it in writing and the documents weren't delivered properly, yeah, it's possible. I just found paperwork that says I've been the trustee of my parents' house for the last 4 years. You should talk to an attorney." The next morning, I called the law firm listed in the trust filing. After verifying my identity, they scheduled a meeting with Margaret Fisher, the estate attorney who handled my grandparents' affairs. Margaret was in her 60s, sharp-eyed and calm. When I walked into her office, she looked at the bandage on my head, but didn't ask. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, standing to shake my hand. "I've been expecting you for a while now. I just found out about the trust this week." She nodded and pulled a thick file from a drawer. "Your grandmother amended the trust in 2021. She named you successor trustee effective on your 30th birthday. We were instructed not to contact you. She wanted you to reach out on your own terms." She placed the papers in front of me. "You've had full authority for 4 years. I flipped through the pages. Everything was signed, notarized, filed properly. "There's something else," she said, handing me a sealed envelope. "Your grandmother left a letter." The handwriting was familiar, curvy, and careful. "Lauren, if you're reading this, then you finally know the truth. I changed the trust because I've seen how your father handles money. I couldn't let the house slip away to bad decisions. You've always been responsible, even as a child. I trust your judgment. With love." "Grandma," I folded the letter, slowly, hands steady now. "There's a pattern here," Margaret continued. "Your parents took out multiple equity loans over the last few years. They're behind on payments. But how, if they weren't trustees, they may have presented themselves as such. A lot of lenders don't verify documents closely, but those loans weren't authorized by you." She slid another folder toward me. Statements, credit pulls, past due notices. They've borrowed nearly $700,000 against the house. I took the folder home. Jason helped me go through the numbers that night. "They've maxed out multiple credit cards," he said, scanning one of the statements. "Luxury stores, five-star restaurants, vacations. None of this looks essential." I stared at the paper in front of me, hands still. "They've been living like they had no limits," he said. "I guess they thought no one would ever check." He nodded slowly. "You have options, Lauren. You could talk to them, try to help, or you could sell the house." I didn't answer, but the thought stayed with me long after he went home. That night I stood by the window in my condo, lights off, looking out over the river. The stitches near my temple itched under the bandage. The bruises were starting to fade, and I knew what I had to do next. Monday morning, I took the folder of documents to a real estate attorney downtown. Sarah Rodriguez came highly recommended, calm, precise, and thorough. Her office overlooked the harbor, the kind of place where nothing was rushed and no detail was missed. She took her time reading through everything: my trustee appointment, the loan statements, the overdue notices. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, adjusting her glasses. "You're the legal trustee of a property your parents live in. They've taken out multiple loans without your approval, and the trust is now in financial trouble." I nodded. "I want to know if I can sell the house." She folded her hands. "As trustee, you not only can you have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the trust. Given the debt and missed payment, selling could be considered the most responsible action. What about them? They've lived there for over 30 years. You'll have to serve proper notice, 30 days minimum. If you sell to a private buyer, you might negotiate more time, but the authority is yours." I sat quietly for a moment. "Is there anything they can do to stop it? They could file a claim in probate court, but unless they can prove that you're mismanaging the trust, which this paperwork makes difficult, the odds aren't in their favor." She slid the folder back toward me. "If you're sure we can move forward." I was sure. By Thursday, I'd listed the property with Patricia Collins, someone I'd worked with for years. I didn't want any conflict of interest, so I kept it out of my own agency. We walked through the house while my parents were away. The renovations were high-end, but done without permits. Patricia made notes as we went. "We'll start at $1.2 million, she said, stepping onto the back deck. "Colonial, desirable neighborhood, updated, finishes great school district. This will go fast." We brought in photographers that same afternoon. The listing went live online the next morning. By Friday at noon, there were 6 offers. The strongest came from a local developer, cash buyer, no contingencies, 30-day close. "This is a clean deal," Patricia said. "It's more than fair, especially considering the lien risk." I signed the acceptance that evening. Then I called her office and instructed them to send formal notice to my parents. The next morning, my phone started buzzing. I ignored every call, every voicemail. Midday, Brian called. "Did you really do it?" he asked. "You listed the house. It's already under contract." There was a long pause. "I don't understand. How can you sell their house?" "It's not their house," I said. "It belongs to the trust, and I'm the trustee." I didn't know any of that. Grandma put me in charge. She changed the documents before she died. "They've been taking out loans without permission, Brian. The place was headed toward foreclosure." He was quiet again. "Where are they supposed to go? That's for them to figure out." Monday morning, I was in a meeting with clients when my assistant knocked. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "There's a couple here. They say it's urgent. They say they're your parents." I stepped into the hallway. My mother stood by the reception desk, arms crossed. My father looked red-faced, fists clenched. "What have you done?" he said, loud enough for the waiting room to hear. "You're selling our home behind our backs." "This is a professional environment," I said. "We can't do this here." "You ungrateful," my mother started. I turned to security. "Please escort them out." As they were being led toward the door, my father called out, "You'll regret this, Lauren. You have no idea what you're doing." That afternoon, I filed for a restraining order. The judge reviewed the medical report from the hospital, the police incident report from the party, and the voicemail transcripts. It was granted immediately temporary, but enforceable. A few days later, I agreed to meet them one last time. Brian arranged it at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. He got there early, chose a quiet booth in the back. I arrived with a folder of documents and a copy of Grandma's letter. When they walked in, I barely recognized them. My father's blazer was wrinkled. My mother's makeup looked heavier than usual, like she was trying to cover the stress. "You had no right to do this," my father said, sliding into the booth. "None." "I have every right," I replied, placing the trust papers on the table. "Grandma gave it to me in writing." My mother leaned forward. "What trust?" I pushed the folder across to her. "The one that's owned the house for the last 2 decades. She read the first page, then flipped quickly through the rest. "This is forged." "No," Brian said quietly. "It's not. I called Judith. You remember her from church? She witnessed the amendment." My father gripped the edge of the table. "We'll take you to court." "No judge will let you throw your parents out of their home." "You're welcome to try," I said. "But everything's in order." My mother looked up. "So what now? We're just homeless. You don't care what happens to us. I've instructed my attorney to offer you 30% of the proceeds. After the debt's paid, that'll leave you with over $500,000. They blinked. "That's not a gift," I added. "It's a settlement if you meet 2 conditions." "What conditions?" my father snapped. "1, you issue a public apology for the incident at Brian's party. 2, you agree legally that you have no claim to my condo or any future property I own." "Are you kidding?" my mother said. "You want us to apologize for disciplining our daughter? That's all. It was a family disagreement. You hit me in the head with a bottle," I said. "That's not a disagreement. You provoked it," she muttered. Brian stared at her. "Mom, that's not normal. We're not doing it," my father said. "No apology. No signing anything." I stood gathering the folder. "Then the house will be sold, the loans paid. The rest remains in the trust." "You can't do this to us," my mother said. "We're your parents." I didn't answer. I just walked toward the door. Brian followed me outside. "You sure? They hit me. They tried to take my home. They haven't taken responsibility for either." He nodded slowly. "It just feels wrong. I don't know." "We grew up thinking parents are always right," I said. "But that's not the world we live in." We stood in silence for a moment. Then he opened the car door for me. As we pulled away from the coffee shop, I watched their reflections in the window until they disappeared. A few days after that meeting at the coffee shop, the calls started again. First from numbers I didn't recognize local, then out of state. Then voicemails that blurred into each other. Angry, begging, accusing. My mother's voice clipped and breathless. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." My father followed with a text. "You've been a burden from the beginning. The least you can do is support us now." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The restraining order was still in effect, and the closing date on the house was less than 3 weeks away. But I knew better than to think it was over. They started contacting people I knew. A colleague pulled me aside after a morning meeting. "Someone's been calling the office," she said gently, "asking about your mental health. Jason got a call at work, too, from someone pretending to be a concerned family member. We reported it each time, quietly, carefully." Meanwhile, Patricia and I worked through the closing paperwork. The buyer, a developer with plans to renovate, was eager to move quickly. The loan payoffs were scheduled, the title cleared. After deductions, the trust would retain just over $500,000. I chose not to tell my parents, not until the keys changed hands. I met with Sarah again to finalize the disbursement terms. We rechecked the math, lined up the wire transfers, and drafted a final notice of occupancy termination. Everything was clean, legal, documented. Still, I kept my phone off at night, just in case. The morning of closing, I went in early. I wore a dark blue dress, low heels, hairpin back, not for them, just for me, to feel grounded, present. Sarah met me in the lobby. "Everything's in order," she said. "Once you sign, it's official." We sat at the long conference table, the buyer's attorney across from us, a notary to the side. I picked up the pen, signed, initialed, dated, and just like that, the house was no longer theirs. That evening I walked down to the river. The light was soft, quiet. I watched the rowers pass under the bridge, their movements slow and practiced. Jason joined me a little while later. "They moved out," he said. Brian texted. "They took everything by noon." I nodded, still watching the water. He sat beside me on the bench, close but not crowding. "You did it," he said. I didn't reply. Not yet. That night I slept without waking once. The next morning I met Sarah at her office again. Now that the property's sold, she said, "What would you like to do with the remaining trust funds?" I thought about it. The answer came quicker than I expected. "Set aside a portion," I said, "for education, my brother's future kids." She paused, then nodded. "We can create a sub-trust for that." I left the rest where it was for now. No sudden decisions, no reactionary moves. The house was gone, the debt was cleared. My parents had moved into a smaller apartment across town. They didn't call again, but they weren't quiet. Brian told me they still reached out to him daily, asking him to talk to me, pressure me, relay messages. When he told them no, they turned cold, accusing him of betrayal, guilt-tripping, shifting blame. "It's like a switch flips," he said one afternoon. "One minute they're begging, the next they're furious." "Have you thought about therapy?" I asked. He nodded slowly. Stephanie already made the appointment. I invited him and Stephanie for dinner that week. Something easy: roasted chicken, fresh bread, a bottle of wine Jason brought over. After dessert, Brian stayed back while Stephanie stepped out to take a call. "I want you to know he said you were right." I didn't say anything. At first I kept thinking it felt wrong. Selling the house, kicking them out. But after that meeting, after they refused to apologize, I don't know. He looked down at the table. I see it now, the way they twist things, always have. We sat there for a while, just the hum of the dishwasher behind us. Eventually, he asked if I'd help with their wedding. Nothing big, just something meaningful. Small venue, close friends. "No invitations to Mom and Dad," he added. I raised an eyebrow. "Because of me? No. Because of them." A few days later, I met with my accountant to finalize the education trust. We kept it modest but protected, structured to grow over time. Not just for tuition, but tutoring supplies, anything they might need someday. "You're sure?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It ends with us." That night, I stood in my kitchen flipping through the mail. Bills, a card from Aunt Margaret, and a flyer for a community art class. I paused, then set it aside. Maybe. Not everything had to be decided now, but the silence that followed, that felt like a beginning. By mid-fall, the bruises were long gone. The cut on my temple had healed clean, just a faint line under my hair, but every now and then a loud noise or a sharp movement still made my chest tighten. The emotional part, that was slower. Dr. Bennett, my therapist, called it complicated grief. She said I was mourning two things at once: the parents I had and the kind of parents I never did. Some days I'd sit in her office unsure where to begin. Other days it all came pouring out: years of walking on eggshells, of second-guessing myself, of shrinking to keep the peace. She gave it names: enmeshment, control, emotional neglect. Naming it didn't erase it, but it helped. At work, I poured myself into the business. I hired an assistant, moved into a larger office suite, and started taking on bigger clients. I said no more often politely, but firmly. I stopped apologizing for setting limits. Jason noticed the shift first. One evening, while we were going over listings at the kitchen table, he looked up and said, "You hold yourself differently now." I smiled but didn't respond. He didn't mean physically. He meant I wasn't waiting for someone else to give me permission. Brian and I talked more too. At first, it was awkward. He was trying to make sense of his own place in everything. One Sunday afternoon, we met for coffee. The cafe was quiet windows fogged from the rain outside. "I always thought I was the one they loved," he said. "Now I'm not sure I ever really knew what love looked like." He told me about the therapy sessions he and Stephanie had started, about how hard it was to separate his own voice from theirs. The golden child thing, he said, staring into his mug. "It's not a compliment, it's a role. They gave us scripts," I said. "You followed yours. I tore mine up." He nodded. "They still call me, you know, every other day, wanting updates, money, sympathy. What do you do? I listen. Sometimes. But I've started hanging up when it turns." He paused, then added, "Stephanie wants to go no contact. And I'm getting there. In September they got engaged. Quietly. No big announcement. Just a dinner with a few friends, a phone call afterward to let me know. We're keeping the wedding small," he said. "And we're not inviting them." I didn't ask why. He didn't offer more. I helped them pick a venue, a small inn on the coast, with wraparound porches and fireplaces in every room. Not flashy, just warm. As the date approached, my parents tried again. They left voicemails long and rambling. My father spoke in half threats, half pleas. My mother's voice trembled, though I couldn't tell if it was from anger or desperation. They didn't ask about the wedding, not directly. Instead, they circled around it asking if Brian had made any big decisions lately, if he'd been distant with me, if I was influencing him. One day a letter came. No return address. Just my name on the envelope. Inside, a single line in my mother's handwriting. "You may have won, but you've lost your family." I folded it neatly and placed it in the back of a drawer. Jason and I spent more time together that fall. He brought groceries, helped with errands, stayed late, even on weeknights. One evening, we took a walk along the river. The wind had picked up and I tucked my hands into my coat pockets. "You know what I love most about you?" he asked after a long stretch of quiet. I looked at him. "You don't just bounce back," he said. "You rebuild, better." Neither of us said much after that. The river kept moving. The lights from the bridge reflected off the water. Over Thanksgiving, I visited Aunt Margaret. She'd invited a few cousins I hadn't seen in years, people I'd been quietly cut off from after moving away. They greeted me like no time had passed. We passed around pie and stories. One of my cousins showed me photos of her kids. Another asked about real estate, curious about the market. No one asked why I hadn't brought my parents. No one needed to. A few days later, I signed up for that painting class, the one I'd tucked into the back of the mail pile. It was once a week Thursday evenings in a sunroom above a bookstore. I didn't paint anything good, not at first, but the quiet helped. The colors, the way no one expected anything from me in that room. Not perfection, not performance, just presence. And that was enough. Brian and Stephanie's wedding took place in early spring. The inn overlooked the coast just like they wanted, quiet. Simple, no formal dress code, no speeches, just the people who mattered. I helped set up flowers on the porch while Jason unpacked food trays in the kitchen. A few close friends, a couple of colleagues, Aunt Margaret, and two of our cousins. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. No one filmed it. No one posted. Afterward, Brian stood with his arm around Stephanie, his tie loosened, cheeks flushed from the cool breeze. "You know," he said quietly, as we watched guests sip cider on the back patio, "I always thought family had to look a certain way." He paused. "Turns out it can just feel a certain way." Later that week, we finalized the paperwork for the education trust. The account was now fully funded and named after our grandparents. I printed copies for Brian, storing mine in a labeled folder in the safe. Tuition, tutoring, whatever they need, I told him. No one else touches it. He looked at me, then nodded. That means more than you know. That spring, Jason and I started spending most nights together. At first, it was convenience. He had a longer commute and my kitchen was better stocked. But soon we fell into rhythm. Cooking on weeknights, grocery runs on Sunday mornings, quiet evenings with old movies or podcasts playing in the background. One night in April, he brought home a small unmarked box. Inside was a key. "I'd like to make this more permanent," he said, setting it gently on the counter. I didn't answer right away, but I didn't need to. The key stayed on the hook by the front door, and a week later he brought over the last of his things. We never called it moving in, but his clothes were in the drawers and his shoes lined up beside mine. The calls from my parents had stopped completely. They hadn't made contact since Brian's wedding, but I heard things. Aunt Margaret said they'd started telling people I had mental health issues, that I'd acted out of revenge, that I was unstable. They'd gone back to church, joined a new small group, and began rewriting the story. They're telling people you stole the house she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. But no one's really buying it. I didn't try to correct anything. I didn't call them out. There wasn't anything left to say. Instead, I focused on the parts of life that felt steady. My business grew. I hired another assistant. I started mentoring younger agents, 2 women just starting out, who reminded me of myself 10 years earlier. We met once a week to go over listings contracts, negotiation strategies. I taught them what Claire once taught me, how to build something on your own, even when no one believes you can. Jason's sister invited us to dinner one evening in May. It was just the 4 of us, candles flickering in hurricane glasses on her back deck. Her youngest child had drawn a picture of our house and handed it to me in crayon, a square with a door, a tree, and 2 smiling stick figures inside. "I added your friend," he said, pointing to Jason. "And that's me?" I asked. He nodded. "You live together now." Jason laughed, but his sister smiled differently, quietly, knowingly. I started going back to painting class, too. The instructor gave me a nod of recognition when I walked in. I took a seat in the back, picked up a fresh canvas, and let my hands move without thinking too much. It still wasn't good, but it was something. In early June, I ran into my old guidance counselor at the farmer's market, Mrs. Kelso. She used to push me to join student council, told me I was too quiet for business. We stood by a bin of strawberries and chatted about the weather, about retirement, about how grown-up Brian looked in a photo someone had shown her. Then she leaned in a little closer. "Your parents still live around here." I paused. "Across town." She didn't say anything else, just nodded and smiled like she understood. That night, I went through some of my old college notebooks looking for a certain quote I couldn't quite remember. Instead, I found a folded piece of paper I'd written at 18. A list of goals: finish school, buy my own place, build something of my own. I looked at it for a long time, then I folded it again and placed it back inside. I didn't check it off. I didn't need to. The 1-year mark came quietly. No cards, no calls, no reminders except the ones I carried. I took the day off from work and drove north out past the city toward the foothills where the trees were just beginning to turn. There's a trail I like up there. Nothing difficult, just a steady climb through pine and birch that opens to a wide overlook. I packed a thermos of coffee, an old scarf, and one of my sketchbooks. No plans, no schedule, just space. At the top, I sat on a flat rock with my knees tucked in, watching the valley stretch out below. The air was cool, quiet. A few birds circled in the distance. I let the silence settle, let the tension I hadn't noticed I was still carrying start to loosen. I thought about that night, Brian's birthday, the champagne, the carpet, my hands shaking on the bathroom sink, and how far I'd come from that version of myself. Back then, I was still hoping they might change, still hoping they'd see me as someone worth treating with respect. But people show you who they are, sometimes again and again, and eventually you believe them. It didn't happen all at once. It took months of therapy, of sitting through memories I'd buried, of learning how often I'd mistaken control for love. And it took people, good people, holding space for me without trying to fix it. Jason, Aunt Margaret, Stephanie, even Brian in his own time. Family, I learned, doesn't start with blood. It starts with safety, with truth, with people who show up even when it's uncomfortable, people who don't ask you to shrink to stay close. I didn't regret selling the house, not because it felt good, but because it was necessary. Sometimes healing means drawing a hard line and walking away from people who won't meet you halfway. And even then, it's okay to grieve them. It's okay to miss what never really was. As the sun started to dip behind the ridge, I opened my sketchbook and traced the treetops with a pencil. Not carefully, not skillfully, just enough to remember the moment. I don't know exactly what comes next. But I know I won't build it on fear or guilt. I'll build it on quiet mornings and steady friendships, on late-night dinners and real conversations, on honesty, on joy that doesn't ask permission. If you're listening and you've carried weight that wasn't yours to carry, I hope you set it down. And if you've been told you're selfish for choosing peace, know that peace is not selfish. It's sacred. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If it meant something to you, I'd be honored if you shared it or left a comment. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone. Take care of yourself. You're allowed to.